Good morning from Sutina. Lo and behold, I can see the Rockies and I can see snowcaps. And I could breathe. So yippee-yi-yi-ki-yo. Let the bells ring. I tried this podcast. I tried starting it 3 times this morning and I've been getting interrupted. So I'm just going to read this off of a TikTok that's called Cowtown Coyote. And again, we're talking about this separatism. So I'm going to read this to you. And like I said, you can find it on TikTok. It's the Alberta Separatist Referendum 2026. A member of the prominent pro-separatist group, the Alberta Prosperity Project, has resigned after he used a racial slur at an event on Thursday when the group presented a draft constitution for an independent Alberta. The event, held by the group behind the Stay Free Alberta Citizen Initiative petition, featured members of the Black Hat Gang, a group from Medicine Hat who were credited with contributing to the plan, who presented the document. One of the members, Ian Parkinson, was introduced as a co-writer of this draft constitution called the Foundation of Freedom, which was presented in Airdrie and live-streamed online. Quote, "Every citizen has the right to life, liberty, and security to the person, his own property, not some flip-flop, towel-headed police officer who doesn't even speak Canadian," unquote. Parkinson said that the applause by members of the audience. The derogatory remarks made by Parkinson is typical, directed to a Sikh Muslim or Arabian individual in reference to culture and a religious headdress. On Friday afternoon, Mitch Salavesti, the leader of the Alberta Prosperity Project, said he had accepted Parkinson's resignation from the group effective immediately, and that Parkinson will not participate in, speak, or represent the group's events or initiatives. Quote, "I want to be plain about it. The Alberta Prosperity Project does not condone or tolerate what was said. We strongly oppose those comments, and we are disappointed they were made from a platform we provided," unquote, the statement read. The group Parkinson is associated with, the Black Hat Gang, met with senior government officials and proposed a new draft document of Albertans' rights on 2024. Parkinson was not a board member or officer of the Alberta Prosperity Project, the group confirmed. CBC News reached out to Parkinson, the comment, but did not receive a response in time for publication. In the interview with CBC, Sylvestis said he was backstage when that comment was made and did not hear what Parkinson said. Quote, "That was very, very unfortunate," he said that of Parkinson's comment, adding that it does not represent his group's view. Unquote. "I had to hear that. I would have dealt with it right there on the spot," unquote. Quote, "It took away from what the event was supposed to be," unquote. Parkinson's comments drew widespread criticism, including from several within the separatist camp, who say it paints their side with broad brushes. Kevin Wilson, co-leader of the pro-independent group and the registered third-party advertiser, Let Alberta Decide, denounced the remark made by Parkinson in an interview with CBC News. When asked whether Parkinson's comment reflects poorly on separatism, Wilson said, quote, "That's always the challenge when people are painting with a broad brush. That when we get someone, that happens like what happened last night from subgroup called the Dark Hat, making ridiculous, racist, and inappropriate comments that has tainted the whole movement, unquote. And that's, or quote, and that's why it's upsetting and troubling, because it doesn't reflect the value of Alberta I know, the support independence from all walks of life, unquote. Foundation of Freedom criticized as nonsensical. The Alberta Prosperity Project's draft constitution has also received backlash from those representing the group within the separatist camp. Some proposals include that the Foundation of Freedom document include the fourth branch of the government called the Oversight Branch. No property tax, 4-year term limits for most elected officials, and judges would be elected in sovereign Alberta, not appointed. So, again, what the heck? It seems
it's racist. It's just right.
It just seems that the more people want to create friction, like there's so many. What can I say? You know, I talk about my podcast, and I've given different citations, and even like how growing up here, and even today, like the reality of it is, yes, we're different. You know, people who come into Canada, we're all multicultural, diverse. I didn't come into Canada. I'm from here, like 10,000, however long my DNA shows. Like, what the hell? It's amazing to me that the lack of, and it's I think a human condition. We're all lazy to do the homework. We're all lazy to do the investigation. We're all lazy to try and figure out, how we think, or even to support people. Again, too, what can I say? I try to give some clarity on some of the things that I think are important for people.
Program the federal government infiltrated, destabilized AIM with surveillance. Here are 5 facts that you need to know about one of the most powerful Native American movements in history.
So this particular podcast, and I'm just going to add this to what I've put, because like a lot of Europeans, a lot of people don't really understand the history of what's been going on in the United States and Canada. Like I briefly talk about, I sort of give a generalization of the conquistadors and trafficking 14-year-olds. Then I go into, the breeding of slaves, like for 100 years, and how black women or girls were treated. Dark skin were more to be house servants, house slaves, whereas light-skinned black people were more into fancy, like they were more prostituted. And again, too, like I said, if you do, I forget which of the genes. I know some are passed down from the mom, some from the dad, but the sequence that's passed down from men to men, when they do the DNA of black American men, because of that 100 years of white men having breeding grounds and plantations, 60 to 70% of black Americans, their DNA is rooted not in Africa, but in European DNA. So understand that they bred themselves with black women, and the descendants of black America have more European blood than African blood. And again, too, this whole notion of taking people who are strong enough to do the heavy labor. And I say this because I've met American Indians who just say, "Oh, we weren't slaves." Well, because we had, our DNA was so different. We were so susceptible to diseases of Europeans because of our lifestyle. We didn't graze and raise animals. we hunted and fished and lived, our DNA, the Osheti 7 Council Fires of the Sioux Nation, our bloodline is O-type. Where else in the world would you have such a high concentration? And why? The first 100 years, they killed off 5 generations of our children because our immune system wasn't built for the things that Europeans brought over. Black people in Africa, their immune systems had been built because, again, all the migration between Africa and Europe was going on since the beginning of time. So, again, you're going to have white people who are looking at Native Americans, Indigenous people, as being weak, savage-like. So again, when Abraham Lincoln supposedly freed the slaves, the reality of still having servants, like people, like, again, in terms of getting an education and being managers and narcissistic Machiavellian people climbing up the anthill and putting down all these other people who are intelligent as well, but the caste system has been in place. So of course, yes, with black females, it's like whatever color your skin is determines your life. Either you're going to be working for the master, either way, you're still going to be either as a house slave, farmer, rancher slave, or a prostitute. Now, why am I so critical on this? Is because Métis people, they're the fancy people. They would be the fancy people in the black culture, because again, when they set up the Indian Act in the middle 1800s and so forth, they knew like whatever slaves or servants they wanted. They weren't looking at Indigenous people as being intellectual. They were looking at as savage and stupid. And again, even today, this stereotype of savage, stupid, good-for-nothing drunks living off of welfare. Same mentality in the early 1800s. Slave mentality, master and slave. So in those industrial schools, they recruited mixed-blood kids, the fancy boys, so that they would be trained to be ranch hands, farm hands. They weren't educating them to be owners of ranches and farmers. No, they didn't. They weren't. And understand this: my grandfather in Sioux Valley, he was a farmer, very successful farmer. You look at the Canadian Sioux in Canada, the book, and my grandfather's name is in there. So, and even the jealousy and the way white people treated successful people, I mean, right from the Trail of Tears, I mean, it's the history and the notion of people wanting to own or to control other people. Like I said, look at the billionaires today. But anyway, going back to industrial schools and just wanting to train Indigenous boys as servants, as farmhands and ranch hands. You look at, like, even in Sioux Tina, the amount of women who married such men, not Indigenous men, but white men who were cowhands, farm workers. They weren't businessmen. They weren't, academics. So that parallels. But the whole notion that pretending to be Métis when it has such a derogatory term, because it's the fancy boys and fancy girls that were set aside to be prostitutes, and again too, like even if you were like in Parliament when they said, well, if we educate these boys, they'll go back to the reserves and they'll marry girls and they'll convert them back to savages. Again, this whole mentality of like Indigenous people not being fit to be even slaves. Again, why? Because we were so biologically weak because of the diseases, not intellectual, because of the diseases that we're biologically susceptible to. There is a Dakota doctor who is trying to fundraise to create university that just educates Indigenous doctors. How long? It's been 500 years, and that mentality of white privilege. That's why you have the poor, uneducated white people who want to separate from Alberta. And I'm going, what? You haven't even been here. I'm 74 years old. These separatists and these people, these white supremacists, haven't even been here that long. They haven't. And even when they did come in, even when settlers did come in, they settled from northern Alberta into southern Alberta. And if it weren't for the Métis, the ones who married the fur traders, if they didn't come into southern Alberta and mix with the Tsuut'ina, so the Tsuut'ina would have their wives and then would go into the Treaty 7 area, gather food provisions, pemmican, exchange with cloth and stuff, and then take it back up to northern Alberta for the settlers to live. That's how Alberta was started, through the Indigenous peoples in the Treaty 7 area providing food sources for the settlers in northern Alberta because they were starving, like trying to plant potatoes. My God. Okay, so all this, when they established the Métis settlements in northern Alberta, for good reason. You know, the mixed bloods. Those are Indigenous people whose parents had status, but they didn't have a land base. So the reality of like what people are trying to track down has a lot to do with trafficking. Has a hell of a lot to do with human trafficking. And so, you know, when people are pretending or wanting to mystify or culturally appropriate Indigenous ways of knowing, it comes at a price. Look at Ashley Collingbull and Miss Universe and these two Yahoo women from the land of Lilliput or the Gulliver's Travels had the audacity to wear Indigenous costumes. And even the organizer, a white woman claiming she had Indigenous bloodline, so therefore she sanctioned such a process, such an ordeal, such a tribute to Indigenous people, when she's so... the capital F, sign, capital F, what the? Yes. The audacity of white privilege pretending to be Indigenous because she says she's Métis or has mixed blood. Understand this. That bloodline comes from human trafficking. So yes, I'm taking your nose like a little puppy and putting it in shit, because that's what you just displayed by putting all that on public by Miss Universe. Pageant of all things. It's disgusting. It's totally disgusting. See, even for me as an Indigenous woman who I sacrificed a lot to get educated. And then to have white supremacists, to have white people who settled in Alberta just like a couple of decades ago, have the audacity to not be happy with where they're at. When I was 8 and 10 years old and my parents traveled to South America and India, and the poverty, like colonial constructs to just colonize, and like, what the hell? White fragility? Are you afraid you're going to be colonized by people of color? Like, it's monstrous. The frailty of being afraid. And the thing is, the society that you've structured isn't working. It isn't working for women. It isn't working for elderly women. It's just not working. And I think the more you talk about feminism or the environment and things that aren't working, like I had a lady email me, and she made a comment. She says that she was like, there was she had some feelings about like my podcast and how like self-discovery, emotional afterlife of surviving broken power structures. That she was making a comment about somebody that she knows. She says, your recent episodes especially stood out to me for how you move through environmental harm, historical trauma, empathy, grief, and the complexities of human behavior without flattening any of it away. Given your perspective and the way you approach difficult material outside a therapy speaks framework, I thought, and then she mentions this lady that has a similar podcast. She says her show, and how she gave me examples of this woman's show, like Save the World, the Sahara Club in Los Angeles, extractive systems in grounded human terms. Like, just see again, this is a non-Indigenous woman, or I don't know if she seems like she's been in an urban setting her whole life, and she's talking about this podcast that she thinks I would be interested in listening to. Like in terms of, she says, it's all about inner toil of living in prolonged crisis and strange mix of conviction, confusion, grief, and survival that come with that. So, I mean, talk about mansplaining. She's telling me it feels, if this feels useful, be happy to send over a few more topics. Like again, privilege. I mean, I'm grateful people are emailing me or telling me that they're listening to my podcast, but it's the whole nature of it. It's the whole nature of not knowing what you're fighting for. There's this. There's a fellow. He's Indigenous. If I can somehow, I think I had him on here. Let's see. Yes, here he is. I'm going to start.
You're learning here. The American Indian movement, also known simply as AIM, started in 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay, and there's a whole bunch of background in it, so I don't want to play the background because it's so loud. And it says it was founded by Native activist Clive Belcourt, Dennis Banks, and George Mitchell to combat police brutality, poverty, and systemic racism in urban Native communities. This is Indigenous Mamas. Native women also played a significant role in the movement. Women like Madonna Thunderhawk, Phyllis Young, and Janet McLeod were critical leaders, organizers, warriors for movement, bringing the powerful voice of Indigenous sovereignty, the community empowerment. AIM has also known for taking bold, high-profile action. One of the most famous was the 19-month occupation takeover of Alcatraz Island. In 1972, AIM also organized the Trail of Broken Treaties, which resulted in a march on Washington and the takeover of the BIA building, that's Bureau of Indian Affairs. AIM's behavior of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington, D.C., brought national attention to the plight of Indigenous people during the occupation. AIM also released a list of demands, called for 20 points, which included the abolishment of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, federal protection for Indigenous religion and culture. In 1973, AIM would also make headlines once again with the occupation of Wounded Knee on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. For 71 days, AIM's members brought Lakota activists stood against corruption, the tribal leadership, and demand justice for Native communities. It was a modern-day battle for sovereignty, and the success of the American Indian movement made it a target of federal government. Through the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Interpol, the federal government infiltrated, dissembled AIM and surveillance, false accusations and violence. Interpol was designed to destroy American Indian movement and silence Indigenous resistance. AIM wasn't just an organization, it was a movement that inspired Native activists across Turtle Island. From the fight for land and water rights to the protection of sacred sites, AIM showed that Native resistance is powerful, necessary, and unyielding. Here's the bonus fact. Native resistance activisms did not stop with AIM. Today, Native activists carry the spirit of AIM into movements of murdered and missing Indigenous women, the Land Back movement, Standing Rock, the environmental justice. AIM led the foundation for the resistance to the ongoing structure of settled colonization. American Indian movement initiated the fire that still burns Native activism today. Was the American Indian movement perfect? Absolutely not. Did they make a lot of mistakes? Yes, they did. But there's no denying that American Indian movement did its part to make the lives of Indigenous people better today. As always, and really curious about, again, this fellow, his name is Indigenous Matters, Indigenous Mamas, MAMAZ, on TikTok. And he encourages people to interact with him. Merciless savage. I think that's the whole point of it. Like, a lot of the structures and how we deal with things that are happening, especially like even within our own communities. Yes, I make mistakes in my podcast. I know I'm not like I have my fragility, but it comes at a price where I'm hoping to educate people about the struggles that we have. There is a need to talk about healthy human sexuality, and I've been recorded a couple of times by the Center of Human Sexuality, and I've also had a couple of recordings in regards to growing up here in Sutina. So I'm hoping to combine all 5 of them into like some sort of structure where I can educate people through my lived experience. How else am I going to do it? I can't say, subject A and subject B and subject C. No, I'm not an expert by any means. However, it intrigues me. It always intrigues me when I meet non-Indigenous people who are curious, who want to know what it's like to be Indigenous, who want to peek into my community without interfering with my process. Again, too, it's like a voyeur, but yet at the same time, too, the boundaries are there, which to me is part of a good investigator. However, there's also people who want to be therapists, mansplaining, exploiting, giving me advice. If you listen to my podcast, I'm a senior. I've had it up to the yin-yang with advice. If you find my podcast interesting, and just that in itself is interesting, keep on listening. However, I don't expect you to fully grasp the gist of what I talk about, because a lot of it has to do with a lot of hurt, heartfelt pain, emotional pain. And recently, this one black fellow, the youngest academic to be a professor, committed suicide. And then I was listening to the Tanuski black air pilots of World War II, and just the racism. This pilot who all he wanted to do was be a black pilot, and for 4 years in this university, this academic place where they train people to be military leaders, they told him that they wouldn't touch him, wouldn't speak to him. Like it's like, and mind you, I'm not saying I've experienced the same, but growing up in schools like in the community of Fairview and around Lord Beaverbrook and Bishop Grandin in the southwest part of the city, I want separatists and white supremacists to understand this. Those communities that are there, they're there because of Indigenous money that went into those schools. The racism, the way of isolation, not talking to me, just like they did with that Tuscany black man who wanted to be a pilot. Like the struggle to learn. The stereotypes that I'm stupid and nothing. See, it's one thing for me to be an Indigenous woman and sort of just like, okay, bring it on. But the reality of it is, like, people don't expect women to be educated. They don't expect women to be intelligent. By God, they don't even expect women to be geniuses. But the reality of it is that as soon as I hit high school, like, I just felt it. Nobody talked to me, like, to even touch me. So, that's the reality of it, that people had the audacity to live off the things that we attributed to communities in Calgary. Of course, yes, you have to have truth and reconciliation. You have to validate that, yes, you are on Treaty 7 territory. You have to do land acknowledgement because we were here before you. And all the things that we had to shut our mouths, all the things that we were trained to fawn over white people, to be limerence over white people, all that classical conditioning of colonialism. This whole psychology of deconstructing and mental health is a chore in itself. It is such a huge pile, like an ant pile. Imagine deconstructing an ant pile, how difficult that's going to be, especially if you have so-called allies who all they want to do is just document. They don't want to participate, like get their hands dirty and lift and take away that ant pile. They don't, because they're not set up that way. That's why when I talk about the American Indian movement in the 70s and like the structure of the encampment in Small Boys Camp by Nordic, Alberta, and how AIM activists came there to seek shelter, protection from the FBI, Interpol, you name it. Do you think Alberta was not involved in all this shit that was happening? Do you think the chiefs of Treaty 7 are going to stand by and let this woman who is pretending that she's got Indigenous blood? What the hell? It's the flavor of the damn month, the damn decade. Shit. That's why I'm saying, really, if you have any kind of European blood in you, that's because of trafficking. Look, our 14-year-olds in the cities in Canada are the most trafficked to this day. The Indian Act doesn't even give us sovereignty over our own children in 2026. Grandfathering and grandmothering all those Indigenous kids who lost their status because they chose to marry a white man. Because they chose to have their children be raised without a culture. And now those children are wondering, what the hell? And they're trying to reconnect. Just the attitude of reconnecting is such a diabolical thing. And yet they have to fawn and say, yes, I'm a good cook. Listen to me. And I'm trying to connect, and this is my life. When the nitty-gritty of it is what I'm talking about in my podcast. There's no sugarcoating. Like what that one person says, oh yes, flies to horse shit. And they said, well, bees to honey. It is that's a good parallel, because with white women it's bees to honey. With Indigenous women it's flies to shit. Like, excuse me, like, it's still the same thing. It's still performative, it's still fawning, it's still limerence. But to take it and say, look, this is what you're participating in. And, I mean, when my cousin was talking about her second cousin, and I said, well, it's all performative. I said, understand this. She had no choice as a child to live in isolated small towns with her white father, to be ashamed of being Indigenous. I said, even Indigenous people in those Indian residential school fawning so that they wouldn't anger their white overseers. Just that in itself is disturbing. For me and my podcast, or if people think that I'm so brazen and so blunt, for damn good reason. And people say, well, Marina, a lot of our elders don't talk. Yes, they don't, because of fawning. Like, if I say anything or I hurt people and they don't want to listen to me, fine. You've been doing that my entire life. But there are people who actually do listen to my podcast, do hear it, like the lady says, this is raw type of, understanding of what I've been going through. But I'm doing it. I'm doing it so our young people know. This struggle is going to be still going on when I'm 6 feet underground. The struggle of what it is to be decolonized. We're never going to be totally decolonized because this is life. We're all on planet Earth trying to just live instead of burning ourselves down with the environment. It's like being in a closed room with heavy smokers and you're trying to take a breath, because that's what has happened to planet Earth. When the air clears and all the smokers are gone, you still have the room, and that's the prediction. The Earth will, what they calculated, at least another 6 billion years before it dries up into a cinder. By that time, I think humanity would have evolved, and either we've disappeared like the dinosaurs. But for the time being, understand how we treat each other as children, or how we perceive each other. It's very like that whole fairy tale and Disneyland, and that's an illusion. That's a delusion. When you're like, again, I said 500 years, Indigenous people didn't know there was a God or a devil. Like, really. And even too, there was a comment, somebody was talking about Muslims, and I just thought, what a horrific thing that these young people and the way they talk about separatism, especially when it comes to like as if people should behave a certain way. If I could find that piece, here's a context. 9 ways to defend cultural appropriation using colonial gaslighting, and how to do the opposite. A couple of weeks ago, Miss Universe Canada contestant who are not Indigenous appeared on national costume competition wearing what looks like incorporated sacred Indigenous items like a headdress. The regional director, Lorraine Gilmore Peters, made a video response to Ashley Collingbull, Miss Universe Canada 2024, the first Indigenous winner, publicly calling out the harm of cultural appropriation incident. You can view the video response from Lorraine linked in the comment. This author is saying, and this is the author is called Relentless Indigenous Woman. That's her social media. I was laughing the entire video because this textbook, Colonial Gaslighting. For educational purpose, I will offer a breakdown on the 9 ways she demonstrated colonial gaslighting. Get this. I mean, like, hello. When I talk about activism, it was born in the 70s, and bless our young people's hearts. Number 1, settlers' moves and innocence. This refers to the strategy settlers used to relieve themselves of the guilt of participating in colonialism without actually giving up settler privilege or land. In video, her disclosure about having an Indigenous great-great-grandmother and her family tree being at the office waiting for acknowledgement is a textbook move to innocence. It is an attempt to claim a native identity or proximity to indigeneity as a shield against accusation of colonial violence. Like, what the hell? You're taking a rape culture and trying to say that you're a victim because your great-great-grandmother was raped, and because of that you're the product, when it has no validity. Like she says, as it should against accusation of colonial violence. Like how many people are so ashamed of their European blood? I have 5%. I don't say it. I have a sister who could pass for a white woman. Excuse me, 500 years. As Indigenous people, we're the most diverse, and again, we're the most documented. Like the Cherokee, they're the most documented. You have to go through so much red tape just to prove you're Cherokee, because so many people have been using it. So this woman, this gaslighting Yahoo. 2. DRVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. DARVO, that's a good acronym. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. The psychological framework often used to describe how perpetrators avoid accountability. Again, narcissistic Machiavellian. Interesting concept, right? Especially when you're a colonizer and a woman, that you've had to climb the corporate ladder this way, and you can think it's so easy to project all this shit on the poor, defenseless female savage type, that you have to, like, victimize us this way. That's just my opinion, okay? My opinion. In the video, she denies the organization did anything wrong. Brackets, at no time did Miss Universe Canada ever give the idea that this was okay. Bracket. Attacks Ashley's integrity for speaking up. Bracket. She was standing there to give us a spanking. Bracket. And reverses the role, painting the organization and herself as the victim of a shitty commentary. Again, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. You know, patriarchy gets so caught up in billionaires who are narcissistic and that Machiavellian that women of privilege also have to use this as you know, part of like their own mental health issues. Like, you know, yes, the struggle is real, but you know, don't take me down with you. Number 3, white innocence, the myth of innocence. This is when white individuals view themselves as morally superior and incapable of causing harm regardless of their actions. Like, that's why I'm saying, you know, when you have black women, dark skin to light skin, the interbreeding of slaves, and you have the overseers like acting innocent, that, you know, like they're innocent regardless of the actions they took for hundreds of years. You know, and people still think they can play the same song and dance, still create puppets. Like, come on. You know, Shakespeare was right. Everything's a stage. Everything, you know, is performative. In the video, her claim that it is unreasonable to expect them to know every cultural nuance position the organization as innocent, ignorant rather than actively perpetrating harm. It frames racism as an unfortunate accident rather than a systemic choice. So, like, excuse me, you know, if I may, as an Indigenous woman, if I said something, sure as hell I'm going to be held accountable. Every part of my life I've been held accountable. Anything I say is I'm being held accountable. And yet this poor, you know, like the myth of innocence, you know, like I'm saying, get off the tree. Get off that cross. I need the wood to create a sweat. You know, really, you're not innocent. You're part of the problem. Like to claim unreasonable, like that you didn't know the cultural nuance. What? I don't know the difference between Italian, Spanish, French, Scottish, Irish. Come on. You like, what the hell? Do your homework. 4, epistemic violence. This is the dismissal or destruction of Indigenous knowledge systems and protocols. Excuse me. Like when we talk about land acknowledgement in Treaty 7, even when I talk to Indigenous people who haven't lived in First Nations, Inuit, or Métis communities, who have status cards, I say to them, know the knowledge systems, know the protocols. And I'm grateful they ask me so I can give them protocols of what to do when they come into Sutina or when they come into Treaty 7. All these things, you have to do the homework. And if you're in white privilege and you don't think you have to do it, excuse me. Look at it as if you're an immigrant and you have to come into a sovereign country and you have to know the protocols and the sovereignty of that nation. We're a nation within a nation. Understand that the world is not your oyster. The world has thousands, 8 billion people. In the video, by reducing Indigenous culture protocols, bracket, the protection of sacred items, unbracket, to mere nuance of every culture and comparing them to bilingual logistics, French versus English, she's actually stripping the critique of its historical and political significance. Like, really, the historical, like when you say English and French, where the hell are the Indigenous languages, you little shit? Where the hell, don't you acknowledge it? You stole those languages from us, and you have the audacity to not even acknowledge the historical or political significance, as if you poo-pooed it that we're invisible? When we have our children, our grandchildren, the very essence of Indigenous, having the courage, some at age 15, to learn their language. You have the Maoris in New Zealand, the resurgence of Indigenous languages, and you don't even understand the sacredness of these items, the sacredness of what it is. You know, excuse me. That's what I call frailty, fragility. 5, tone policing. This is a rhetorical strategy that critiques the manner to protest rather than the substance of the grievance, effectively silencing the speaker. In the video, and this again is the same white woman of privilege, in the video she focuses intensely on the fact that she felt blindsided. Oh, excuse me, poor thing. And that Ashley's delivery was insulting. Hey, when I do my podcasting and you find it insulting, I don't really give a damn. How many white women that I've known as friends throughout my whole academic life, or even non-Indigenous people, who've ridden on my coattails for academic purposes, like hello, and that you blindside me, and that you grifted me, and like hello, that I'm insulting you? Excuse me. You know, Ashley Collingbull has knowledge, lived knowledge, experience. Give me a break. And condescending. She uses these emotional reactions to discredit the actual content of Ashley's message. See, everything, even like for me, going through high school or even university and meeting women who never even declared they were Indigenous, and then afterwards, they start their own business because they say their great-grandmother had Indigenous blood, or that they're still waiting for their Métis card to be processed. Excuse me, now that you can make money and you're not in the academic world of high school or university, go ahead. Go ahead. Actually discredit anybody who's actually lived in First Nations, Inuit, or Métis communities who gives a shit. You know, who fought to get their education, who fought for everything. Bless Ashley Collingbull's heart, the respect she has for her parents and her grandparents and her culture. It boggles my mind. 3, falsely equivalency. That what about defense? Again, this is the quote. This involves creating a distraction by comparing a serious systemic issue, example, Indigenous appropriation, to a trivial or unrelated matter, bilingualism. In the video, why isn't the show done in French and English? We're the bilingual country. She uses this as to minimize the Indigenous grievance, suggesting that if Indigenous people get to speak up, everyone with a nuance should, which is a classic tactic to devalue Indigenous sovereignty. Like, why the hell would she even bring that up? Hello, talk about spoiled bread, or like spoiled recipe, like whatever the hell you were cooking up in this Miss Universe pageant. You're the one who put all the ingredients together to come up with this bullshit. Like that stinks. You're a bad cook there, Miss whatever, what was her name again? This woman who claims she's got Indigenous blood in her. This Lorraine Gilmore Peters. Lorraine, come and talk to me, okay? Really? Could you really stand up and talk to me? I don't think so. A lot of people just sort of ghost me. Or, find me very offensive. And that's okay. Number 5, toning policing. This is a rhetoric strategy that critiques the manner of the protest rather than the substance of the grievance, effectively silencing the speaker. In the video, she focused intensely on the fact that she felt blindsided that Ashley's delivery was insulting and condescending. She uses these emotional reactions to discredit the actual content of Ashley's message. And so, like, even when I talk about healthy human sexuality, matriarchy versus patriarchy, religiosity versus spirituality and ways of living, I've had women who claim to be Indigenous mansplain me. I've had women, like I said, all of a sudden it's the flavor of the month to say you're Indigenous, who claims like I'm condescending, that I'm insulting them because they choose to be, religious. I mean, I went to Lord Beaverbrook High School. I'm talking about religiosity here. And the lady that I went to high school with never once claimed she was Indigenous. But now it's okay for her children and her grandchildren to be fruitful and multiplying under religiosity. And how dare I offend and condescend when I'm only explaining the reasoning behind why I have to question all things that are that has to do with ritual abuse, including religiosity. 6, false equivalency, or what happened defense. This involves creating a distraction by comparing a serious systemic issue, Indigenous appropriation, to a trivial or unrelated, that was already done. 7, good defense. The good intention defense. This framework prioritizes the feeling of persons acting over the actual impact of their actions. In the video, I was so happy to support her, to make her feel pretty. She centers her own internal feelings of support and happiness to justify wearing jewelry, completely ignoring the power of imbalance and the commodification inherent in using those items for her own vanity. I'm just grateful for this relentless Indigenous woman's social media, how she just pointed it out straightforward. Because, I don't have that skill set, so I'm very flamboyant and open, and like again, when people critique me, say, oh, well, you do it with such, well, for whatever reason, if people want to praise the way I speak, fine. I'm just being assertive, or I should say, isn't that what assertiveness is? 8, institutional defensism, corporate narcissism. This is when the organization prioritizes its brand and tightly curates shows over acknowledging systemic wrongdoings. In the video, she repeatedly refers to the script, the teleprompter, and the need to protect the image of the organization. She views the protest as a logistic problem that disrupted and curated perfection of disrupted the curated perfection of the event, rather than a necessary interruption for justice. Excuse me, she like I said, she's the cook. She had all the ingredients for the recipe. Now she's saying that what she cooked was really good. How dare, it's like going to a restaurant and ordering something, and you didn't get what you ordered, and then you're making excuses that, oh, we didn't add salt, enough seasoning. Weaponizing ignorance. This is a choice to remain uneducated about marginalized groups to avoid the responsibility of an ally or respecting boundaries. In the video, she explicitly admits she didn't know the protocols and argues they shouldn't be expected to by stating, "Do I think we needed to apologize? No. I don't think she's asserting that she has the right to remain ignorant and that holding her to standard of education is a form of bullying." What a crock. See, we're talking about a systemic issue here. I mean, all people have a tendency to make mistakes, but excuse me, like when I'm talking to my cousins and they have mental health issues of bullying or mansplaining or lateral violence or misogyny, anything that has to do with an imbalance of somebody being better than the other. Like, what the hell? I don't know, for throughout my life, if I don't know if I've ever apologized to people or like I think people think like, oh, I have to say, oh, I apologize for this. No, I think a lot of times apologies are, for me, have been a conversation, like a conversation of actually, talking about it. Talking about like my beliefs versus your beliefs, deconstructing it, reconstructing it, having a laugh, all those things. It's conflict resolution, having skills. What the hell's the matter with this woman? Again, does she even deserve her name to be said? Lorraine Gilmore Peters, Executive Director. Poo-poo on you. Like, excuse me, poor baby. Yes, it's hard to be a woman. It's really hard. I mean, really, am I being a sarcastic bitch? So what would have been a respectful response? It all comes down to how well someone can hold relational accountability, basically. Here are 9 ways to be an antithesis of Lorraine. I mean, colonial gaslighting. To read the entire article of Nuance calls to action and reflection. You got to go to this website. Again, her name is Relentless Indigenous Woman. She's the whole notion of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. She does webinars, or what they call webinar. And so, take it with a grain, take it, embrace it, take what you need and then release it. Indigenous, Miss Collingbull and Emma Morris, Miss World Canada 2022, for standing up and speaking on these issues. They're examples of what it means to lead with love, despite receiving cruel and arrogant pushbacks. Understand that. I mean, my whole life I've had that. I've had, pushbacks, like people arrogance, and everything, verbal, physical, and I'll reflect before I close. About 30 years ago, my childhood friend who married into the Nakotas. The week that my niece was born was the same week her daughter was killed in an automobile accident, and it made news, and the TV reporters interviewed the father, my childhood friend's husband, and he made a comment about forgiving the person who had killed his daughter, and the comment was like, how can you forgive? And when I think the reality when we talk about holistic and collective approaches to living, and when I talk about historical, what do they call it? Restorative and transformative justice, and that there are jails and are even people pretending to be Indigenous in the jails so they can get extra, going to sweats and little spiritual things because they want to, but there's no proof they're Indigenous. So it adds up there's a whole bunch of Indigenous people in the prisons, but there are injustices that happen, and again too, even last week when that young 24-year-old woman was killed, and nobody even mentioned her name for the first couple of days. When they come home from prison, they come home. Some go to urban areas and they end up, in horrible situations and back in prison. But for those ones who have a land base, who have an Indigenous First Nations community, Inuit community, Métis community, restorative and transformative justice is a process of forgiveness. So that's why I'm saying, when people like when Ashley and this Emma Morrison are standing up, speaking out on these issues, it means they lead with love instead of cruelty. Because we have to embrace those people we love who did a crime. And then we've got to release them on their own recognizance, hoping that they never reoffend. My friend, my childhood friend, will never get her daughter back. But it's knowing that she's never going to be here again, and in honor of her memory, to forgive. These things that you have to practice these things, and for this woman who I don't want to repeat her name again, but to be totally ignorant of the meaning of what it means to be Indigenous, to totally not understand what respect and showing respect for the people you love and those who taught you what forgiveness is all about. With all the horrors of human trafficking, all the horrors of children being born because of sexual assault, all the need to raise our children and to try and say to them, life is worth living. Don't give up. Yet in this day and age, you have a young scholar, the youngest professor. He learned to read and write as a teenager. We have so many Indigenous youth like that who have accomplished so much. And then all of a sudden you have white privilege criticizing them, that they're plagiarizing. Throughout my life, I've had people accuse me of so many things, of my divine gift not being mine. I've had the honor and the privilege to go out and seek invisible helping hands and to embrace and release them. And some people don't have that, and they end up killing themselves. It's systemic racism. People want to poo-poo it and say, it's alcohol and drugs. But when you have a group of people who want to look at you as if you're dumb, stupid, ignorant, and savage-like, and have a low propensity for just understanding forgiveness and love. That's why I talk about healthy human sexuality. My parents loved each other, and so did my grandparents. And as much as we can and try to understand, love isn't forever. We outgrow it. We outgrow each other. And when we do, we have to have the courage to embrace it and let it go. And if love is worth it, then hold on to it for as long as you can before you release it. That's the nature of life. You try to bastardize it or say anything else, that's your choice. That's your life. But anyway, I wanted to put something out there. I'm like I said, this is my third attempt, and hopefully, you as listeners have received something from it. And like I said, for me, it was very difficult, a very provocative thing to talk about. But an advocacy and being an activist isn't easy. And no matter what you try to contribute, even if it's criticized, just do it. You have the right to tell your story.